The boy's hand was still shaking when I pinned it to the hood of his car. Not hard, not violent, just still. The way you hold a door that wants to slam. "You don't touch her again," I said. Not her arm, not her wrist, not her shoulder to guide her out of a room. Nothing. Do you understand me? He tried to pull away, and I let him feel, just for a second, how easy it would have been not to let him. 26 years of standing between important people and the men who wanted to hurt them teaches you exactly how much pressure a joint can take before something tears. I didn't tear anything that night. I just let him know I could have. Who even are you?" he stammered. And there was real fear in his voice now. The kind that comes from realizing you badly misjudged a room. Behind me, in the doorway of my own house, my daughter Emily stood with her hand pressed against a bruise already blooming on her forearm, tears cutting clean lines through the makeup she'd put on 3 hours earlier to go to a dinner she thought would be normal. "He's my father," she said quietly. "I told you he used to be somebody. You didn't believe me." 3 months earlier, I hadn't believed it either. Not that it would come to this. I thought I'd retired from protecting people. I thought the only job left in front of me was being a good neighbor, a decent grandfather someday, a man who mowed his lawn on Saturdays and complained about gas prices like everyone else on my street. I was wrong. There is no retirement from being a father. There is only ever the next person who needs protecting, and the next threat you didn't see coming until it was standing in your daughter's kitchen with its hand around her arm. My name is Marcus Delaney. I am 58 years old, and this is the story of the 11 months that taught me that the hardest thing I ever did in my career wasn't stopping a bullet. It was stopping myself, long enough to do this the right way. I spent 26 years as an executive protection specialist, what people call a bodyguard, though the men and women I worked alongside always hated that word. It sounds like muscle. It sounds like something you hired to stand behind a rope and look big. What we actually did was closer to being a professional warrior. You learn to read a room before you walk into it. You learn to notice the man whose jacket doesn't sit right, the car that's parked a little too long at the curb, the guest at the party whose eyes track the principal instead of the conversation. You learn patience most of all, because 99% of the job is nothing happening, and your entire value is making sure it stays that way. I worked for a private security firm out of Charlotte, North Carolina, protecting corporate executives and a couple of minor political figures. I was good at the job, not because I was the biggest man in the room, but because I was the calmest. Calm is the actual skill. Anyone can be strong for 10 seconds. Being calm for 10 years, that's the job. My wife Carol used to say I brought my work home in the worst way, always checking the locks twice, always sitting facing the door in restaurants. "You're off duty, Marcus," she'd say. She wasn't wrong to tease me, but she also never once complained that the same instincts that made me strange at dinner parties were the instincts that made her feel safe. Carol passed 6 years ago. Ovarian cancer, caught late, gone in 11 months from diagnosis to funeral. I won't dwell on that here, but I'll say this. Losing her taught me that all my training meant nothing against a threat you can't put your body between. It humbled me in a way 26 years of dangerous men never had. We had one daughter, Emily. She was 24 the year this story begins, working as a dental hygienist, living 40 minutes from me in a rented townhouse with a roommate who moved out that spring, leaving Emily to cover the rent alone. She is both, I suppose, because people don't stop being who they are just because something terrible happens to them. Kind almost to a fault. The kind of kind that assumes the best of people even after they've shown her otherwise. Carol used to say Emily got that from her. I used to worry, quietly, that it would be the thing that got her hurt someday. I retired from active protection work 4 years ago. Not because I wanted to, but because a knee injury from a training exercise finally caught up with me, and the firm moved me into a consulting role, reviewing threat assessments, training new hires, occasionally flying out to advise on a security plan for an event. I still keep myself in shape. I still run 3 miles most mornings before the sun is fully up, more out of habit than ambition. My house sits on a quiet street in a suburb north of the city. 2 bedrooms, a garage I've turned half into a small gym, a front porch where I drink. I tell you all of this not because it matters who I was, but because it matters who Emily thought I was. To her, I was just Dad. A little overprotective, sure. She used to roll her eyes at how many times I asked for a new boyfriend's full name and workplace before I'd relax about her seeing him. But to Emily, I wasn't a man who had spent a career reading danger in rooms full of strangers. I was just her father, retired, a little quiet, a man who missed her mother in ways he didn't talk about and loved his daughter in ways he sometimes didn't say out loud enough either. That gap between who I actually was and who she believed I was is where this whole story lives. Emily met Trevor Ashford in February at a co-worker's birthday party. She called me that weekend, voice bright in a way I hadn't heard in a while. "Dad, I think I met someone," she said, and I remember smiling into the phone, genuinely happy for her, already telling myself to be careful not to be the overbearing father who scared off every man before he got a fair chance. Trevor was 31, worked in commercial real estate, drove a car nicer than his salary should have allowed, and had, by Emily's account, a confidence that filled a room. The first time I met him, at a dinner in early March, he shook my hand with the kind of grip calibrated for effect rather than warmth, and called me sir in a way that felt performed rather than respectful. None of that alone means anything. Plenty of good men have firm handshakes and good manners. I told myself I was doing the thing Carol used to tease me about, reading threat into rooms where there wasn't any. The first real crack showed itself in April, over something small. We were at Emily's place for Sunday dinner, and she mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd been offered a promotion at the dental office. Office manager. More money, more responsibility. "I don't know if I'm going to take it," she said, glancing at Trevor before finishing the sentence. Trevor thinks the hours might be a lot with everything else going on. I set my fork down carefully. "What's everything else going on, sweetheart?" Trevor answered before she could. "Just, us. Building something together. She doesn't need to run herself into the ground for a job when..." He stopped, smiled, squeezed her hand. "I just want her to have balance. I care about her." It sounded reasonable. Every controlling thing sounds reasonable the first time you hear it. That's what makes it work. By May, the incidents had a pattern I could have written down like a threat log if I'd let myself see it clearly that early. Emily stopped going to her Thursday night pottery class, the one she'd taken up after Carol died, the one thing she'd said made her feel like herself again, because Trevor didn't like her coming home late on a work night. She stopped seeing her college roommate Priya as often because Trevor said Priya was a bad influence, always talking about exes and drama. Small things, deniable things, the kind of things that, described individually to a friend, sound like nothing. Described together, over months they sound like a cage being built one bar at a time. In June, we had a family barbecue at my house. My sister Denise and her husband came up from Colombia. Trevor worked the grill with a confidence that suggested he thought he was the host. At one point, Denise asked Emily innocently whether she and Trevor had talked about moving in together. "We've talked about it," Emily said, something careful in how she said it, like she was reciting a line she'd rehearsed. "She's still deciding," Trevor cut in, his voice light, but his eyes flicking toward her with something underneath the lightness. "I keep telling her, my place is bigger. Better commute. She wouldn't need to keep paying rent on a townhouse she can barely afford alone. But she's stubborn." He laughed. Everyone laughed with him, the way people do when a joke is delivered with enough confidence that questioning it feels awkward. I didn't laugh. I watched Emily's face instead, the smile that didn't reach the rest of her, and something old and trained in me, the part of my brain that used to scan crowds for the wrong kind of stillness, noted it and filed it away. In my old job, we called that a flag. One doesn't mean any. July brought the second flag, sharper than the first. Emily called me on a Tuesday night, and I could hear immediately that she'd been crying, though she tried to keep her voice steady. "We had a fight," she said. "It's fine. It's stupid. I don't want to talk about it. I just wanted to hear your voice." "What happened, Em?" "He got upset because I went out for drinks with some coworkers after my shift and didn't text him the second I left. He said," she stopped. "He said I made him worry, that if I really cared about him, I'd understand how that feels for him. I don't know. Maybe he's right. I should have texted." I sat with the phone against my ear in my dark kitchen for a long moment before I answered, choosing my words the way I'd been trained to choose words with a principal who was scared and didn't want to admit it. "You don't owe anyone a play-by-play of your evening, sweetheart. Caring about someone doesn't mean reporting to them." "It's not like that, Dad. You don't know him like I do." That sentence, "You don't know him like I do," I would hear some version of it 4 more times over the following months, and each time it would carry a little less conviction and a little more exhaustion, like she was defending him out of habit rather than belief. August brought a family dinner at Denise's house. Trevor made a joke in front of 12 people, including Emily's young cousins, about Emily's weight. Something about how she'd let herself go a little since we started dating. "But that's okay. I still love her." He said it with a grin, an arm around her shoulder, the kind of joke constructed so that objecting to it makes you the humorless one. Emily laughed along, but I saw her hand tighten around her wine glass hard enough that her knuckles went pale. I said something, a quiet, "That's not something to joke about, Trevor." He held up both hands, all wounded innocence. "Whoa, sir, I'm just teasing her. We do this all the time, right, babe?" And Emily nodded, backed him up, told me it was fine. I let it go that night. I've replayed that decision more times than I can count since. I told myself I was respecting her right to run her own life, that a father lecturing his grown daughter would only push her further away. All of that was true. It was also, if I'm honest, partly fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of turning my trained eye on my own family and finding something I couldn't fix. September brought the 5th incident, and it's the one that sits heaviest with me now. Emily came to dinner at my house alone. Trevor was working late, she said, though something in her voice made me doubt it. Halfway through the meal, her phone buzzed on the table over and over, a rapid staccato of notifications. She glanced at it, and I watched her face change. Go tight, go smaller. The way a person's whole posture shrinks when they're bracing for something. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, it's fine. He just gets weird if I don't answer right away." She typed something back quickly, apologetic even in the rhythm of her texting. I told him I was having dinner with you. He doesn't love it when I don't check in. "Emily, does he do this a lot? Track where you are? Get upset if you don't answer fast enough?" She looked down at her plate. "It's not tracking, Dad. He just cares. He grew up with a dad who left. You know that. I'm supposed to be patient with that. Being patient with someone's pain doesn't mean losing yourself inside it." She looked up at me then, and for just a second, I saw something honest in her face. Recognition, like a part of her already knew what I was saying was true and wasn't ready to hear it out loud yet. Then the phone buzzed again, and the moment closed like a door. "I should head out," she said. "Don't want him to worry." I watched her taillights pull out of my driveway that night and stood on my porch in the cold a long time after they disappeared, running through everything the way I used to run through a threat assessment before I let a principal walk into a room. Isolation from friends, isolation from hobbies, public humiliation disguised as affection, monitoring and control disguised as care, escalating small cruelties normalized by laughter. I had built a career noticing exactly this pattern in strangers, hired to protect people from men who did exactly this. I had somehow let 5 months pass, telling myself it was different because it was my own daughter, because he seemed successful. That night, standing on my porch, I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to force anything. I wasn't going to lecture her into a corner. But I was done pretending I didn't see what I saw. I started quietly, paying closer attention. Not spying. I want to be clear about that because it matters to how this story ends. Just paying attention, the way you do when you finally admit to yourself that something in the room isn't right. It was a Tuesday in early October when everything I'd been watching stopped being a pattern and became a fact. Emily called me at 9:47 at night. I remember the exact time because I looked at the clock on my nightstand the instant the phone rang. And some old instinct, the same one that used to wake me at odd hours during protection details, told me before I even answered that this wasn't a normal call. "Dad," her voice was wrong, thin and shaking, the words coming out too fast, like she was trying to get them out before something stopped her. "Dad, can you come get me? I'm at my place. I'm okay. I'm okay. But can you come?" "I'm already putting my shoes on," I said, and I was, phone wedged against my shoulder, moving through my dark house on instinct, keys in hand before she'd finished the sentence. "Talk to me, Em. Are you hurt?" "He grabbed my arm," she said, and her voice cracked in a way that broke something loose in my chest. "We were arguing about, it doesn't matter what, Dad, it doesn't matter." And I tried to walk into the other room, and he grabbed my arm to stop me, and I told him to let go, and he didn't, not right away. And then he did. And he left. He's gone now. I locked the door. I'm okay. I'm just, can you come? 26 years of training does something to your body in a moment like that. It doesn't remove the fear. It doesn't remove the fury either. which was already rising in me hot and total, more total than anything I'd felt since Carol's diagnosis. What it does is compartmentalize it, box it up neatly, and set it aside so your hands can still work. So you can still drive at exactly the speed limit even though every part of you wants to floor it. So you can keep your voice level on the phone even though your heart is going so hard you can feel it in your ears. I'm coming, sweetheart. Stay on the phone with me. Are the doors locked? Windows? Yes, Dad, please don't do anything. I don't want this to be a whole thing. I didn't answer that right away because I honestly didn't know if I could promise it. I'm not going to do anything except come get my daughter, I said instead, which was true in the moment, even if it left room for what came later. The drive took 31 minutes. I know because I clocked it, the way I used to clock response times during a threat. Every red light felt like it lasted an hour. My hands were steady on the wheel. That part of the training never leaves you. But underneath the steadiness was a fury I hadn't felt in years. The specific, focused anger of a man who spent his entire working life standing between danger and people who couldn't protect themselves, discovering the danger had walked, uninvited, into the one room he'd never thought to guard. When I got there, Emily opened the door before I even knocked, and the sight of her undid something in me that I'm not ashamed to admit. She looked so small standing in that doorway, arms wrapped around herself, a red mark already darkening on her forearm in the shape of fingers. Not a bruise yet, not fully, but on its way to becoming one. My daughter, 24 years old, standing in her own home looking like she'd been caught doing something wrong, when the only wrong thing that had happened was done to her. I didn't say anything at first. I just pulled her into a hug, and I felt her shaking against me. Felt the sob she'd clearly been holding back finally break loose now that she felt safe enough to let it. I held her the way I used to hold her when she was small and had a nightmare, one hand cradling the back of her head, and I stared over her shoulder at the empty living room, his jacket still slung over a chair, a beer bottle half finished on the coffee table. And I felt something in me go very quiet and very cold and very clear. "He's not touching you again," I said, quiet, into her hair. "Not ever. I promise you that." She pulled back and looked up at me, tears streaking her face. And for the first time in months, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't fear of upsetting him. It was fear of what I might do. "Dad, please, let's just..." I looked at my daughter's arm, at the mark that would be a bruise by morning, and I made her a second promise, the one that mattered more than the first. "I'm not going to do anything crazy," I said. "I'm going to do this the right way. I need you to trust me on that." She nodded because she didn't have anywhere else to go, and I helped her pack a bag, and I drove her back to my house, and I put her in her old room, the one that still had a faded soccer trophy on the shelf from when she was 12. And I sat in my living room until nearly 4 in the morning with the lights off, thinking through, methodically, the way I had once thought through every security plan of my career, exactly what the right way was going to look like. The first thing I did the next morning was nothing that Trevor Ashford would have expected from a retired man in his late 50s who he'd only ever known as Emily's quiet dad. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, the same kind I'd used for 26 years of threat assessments, and I started writing down everything I knew, dispassionately, the way you build a file. Dates, incidents, the pottery class, the comment about her weight at Denise's birthday dinner, the isolation from Priya, the tracking, the texts. the way she flinched at her own phone. I wrote it all down, not because I needed reminding. Every one of those moments was carved into me, but because writing it down turned a feeling into a record, and records are things you can act on. Emily slept until almost noon that first day, and when she came down, quiet and puffy-eyed, wrapped in an old sweatshirt of Carol's that she still kept at my house, I didn't push her to talk. I made her eggs. I sat with her. I let the silence be the kind of silence that says I'm here, rather than the kind that demands answers. It was 2 days later, on a Thursday evening, that I called my old friend Ray Petrosky. Ray and I had come up together in the protection world. He'd left the field work 15 years ago to become a licensed private investigator, doing background checks and due diligence for corporate clients. The kind of work where you learn how to find out everything true about a person that they'd rather you didn't know. "Marcus," Ray said when he picked up, "it's been a while. Everything all right?" "Not really," I said, and told him everything. The pattern I'd watched build over 8 months. The phone call 2 nights before. The mark on my daughter's arm. Ray listened without interrupting, which is a rarer skill than people think. "You want me to run him," he said when I finished. It wasn't a question. "I want to know who he actually is," I said, "not who he's telling her he is." What Ray found over the following 10 days confirmed a fear I'd been carrying since April without letting myself name it. Trevor's job in commercial real estate was real, but the income Emily believed he earned was inflated. He was 3 months behind on car payments and had recently been let go from a previous firm under circumstances his old employer described, off the record, as not something we'd want to put in writing. But you can guess. More troubling was what Ray found underneath that. A restraining order filed 4 years earlier by a previous girlfriend in a different city, later withdrawn before it reached a hearing. Withdrawn orders don't mean nothing happened. In my old line of work, we learned they often mean the opposite, that whatever occurred was bad enough to file over, and that the pressure to withdraw it was its own kind of confirmation. I sat with that information a full day before deciding what to do with it. I want to be honest here because it matters. My first instinct, the old one, built over 26 years of standing at the edge of dangerous situations, was to go find Trevor myself and have a private conversation that wouldn't need a second one. I thought about it seriously enough that I'm not proud of it. I didn't do that. The whole point of everything I'd learned in 26 years of protecting people wasn't the fighting. It was the restraint. Any man can throw a punch when he's angry enough. It takes something harder to hold that. I called Carol's brother-in-law, Frank, a retired family court attorney, and asked him, hypothetically, what a young woman in Emily's position could do, what documentation mattered, what a protective order would require, what her actual legal options were if she wanted to end things safely and permanently. Frank walked me through it patiently, the way he'd once walked Carol and me through our own wills. Then I did something harder than any of the research. I sat Emily down. "I need to tell you some things," I said, "and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." I laid it out for her, not as an attack on Trevor, but as information, the same way I would have briefed a principal on a threat. The financial situation, the employment history, the restraining order, withdrawn but real. I watched her face go through disbelief, then anger, some of it at me for digging, which I understood and accepted, and finally, slowly, something that looked like relief. The relief of a person who has been carrying a suspicion alone for months and finally has someone else confirm it isn't just in her head. "I didn't want to believe it was this bad," she said quietly, staring at her hands. "I kept thinking if I was just patient enough, understanding enough, it would get better. That he'd trust me more, and it would stop. That's not how it works, sweetheart. It doesn't get better with patience. It gets better with distance." She was quiet a long time. "I'm scared of how he'll react if I end it." "That's the most honest thing you've said to me in months," I told her. "And it's the right thing to be scared of. So we're not going to do this carelessly. We're going to do it smart." Over the following 2 weeks, we built a plan the way I used to build a security plan for a principal facing a genuine threat. Because that's exactly what this was. She changed the locks on her townhouse. She documented every message and incident in a folder Frank advised her to keep both digitally and on paper. She told her manager at the dental office quietly, so that if Trevor showed up unannounced, someone would know to call security. She told Priya everything, and Priya showed up within the hour with a bottle of wine and a fierce protective anger that told me Emily had chosen her friends better than she'd chosen this man. And she ended it by phone in a calm, prepared conversation with me sitting in the next room, close enough to hear if something went wrong, far enough to let her do it herself, because I understood, even through my own fury, that this was something Emily needed to do with her own voice. Trevor did not take it well. There were 3 days of increasingly agitated calls and texts, oscillating between apology and blame, love and threat, the exact pattern Ray had warned us to expect. Then, for 11 days, nothing. Silence. I told Emily honestly that the silence worried me more than the calls had. In my old job, silence after a threat rarely meant the threat had passed. It usually meant the person was regrouping. I was right to worry. The 11 days of silence ended on a Sunday evening at my house during a family dinner. I'd planned deliberately. Emily, myself, Denise, and her husband. A quiet evening meant to remind my daughter that her life had good, safe people in it. That the vacuum Trevor had tried to create around her was filling back in. He must have followed her. That's the only explanation that makes sense looking back. He'd shown up at her townhouse first, found it empty, and somehow tracked her here, to an address I know for a fact she never gave him after the breakup. The doorbell rang at 7:40. I remember the time because we just sat down to eat, and I remember the particular stillness that came over Emily's face the instant the bell rang. A stillness I recognize now. The freeze response of someone whose body remembers danger before their mind catches up. I opened the door myself. Trevor Ashford stood on my porch, and I could see immediately that he'd been drinking, not falling down drunk, but enough to loosen whatever control he usually kept on himself in public. His eyes went past me, into the house, found Emily at the table, and "I just need to talk to her," he said. 2 minutes. That's all. "She doesn't want to talk to you," I said, my voice level, my body positioned in the doorway in a way that was not accidental, angled to block his line of sight to her, weight balanced, hands visible and relaxed, everything my training had drilled into me for exactly this kind of moment. Except this time, it was my own front door and my own daughter behind me. "You need to leave." "This isn't your business, old man." He tried to step past me, and I moved, not violently, just precisely, a shift of my body that closed the space he'd been aiming for without ever raising a hand toward him. He stumbled back half a step, more surprised than hurt. And something in his expression flickered, the first genuine uncertainty I'd seen from him in 8 months of watching him perform confidence. Behind me, I heard Emily's chair scrape back. "Trevor, stop. Just go home," she said, her voice shaking but steady enough to get the words out. He pushed past my shoulder, not hard, but enough, and got 2 steps into my living room before I caught his arm, the same grip I would use months later on his car hood, though that night I released it almost as fast as I took it, more warning than restraint. "Don't," I said, quiet, final. "You do not get to walk into my house." "I love her," he said, his voice cracking in a way that might have moved someone who hadn't watched what I had over 8 months. "I just want to fix this." "Because it's not yours to fix," Emily said. And I watched my daughter stand up straight, plant her feet, and say the words I'd hoped for months she'd find the strength to say. "It's over, Trevor. It's been over. I need you to leave, and I need you to never come to my father's house again." He looked at her, then at me, and something in his face curdled from wounded love into something uglier. "You think you're better than me now? Because your daddy's got a nice house?" He took a step toward her, just one, but fast, his hand rising, and every year of training in my body moved before conscious thought caught up. I put myself between them, not a shove, not a strike, just my body, solid and immovable, occupying the exact space he'd been about to close. "You are done," I said, and for the first time that night, my voice wasn't quiet anymore. It carried the weight of 26 years spent standing exactly here, in exactly this position, between a threat and someone who couldn't defend themselves alone. "You are going to walk out that door right now, and if you ever come near my daughter again, her home, her work, this house, anywhere, you will find out exactly what I used to do for a living before I let anyone lay a hand on the people I love." Something in the stillness of me, in the total absence of panic in my voice while he was shaking with rage and alcohol, seemed to finally register with him. Denise's husband had come to stand beside me by then, and Denise had her phone out, already dialing. And the reality of the room, 4 adults, none of them afraid of him, one of them radiating a calm that was somehow more frightening than shouting would have been, seemed to land on Trevor all at once. "Whatever," he muttered, backing toward the door. "She's not even worth this." "Get out," I said, and he did. I walked him to his car myself, not to continue the confrontation, but to make sure he actually left. And it was there, in the driveway, with the porch light behind me, and my hand briefly on the hood of his car as he fumbled with his keys, that I said the words that would end up as the title of every version of this story I'd tell for the rest of my life. "You attacked my daughter," I said, my voice even, controlled, absolutely certain. "You didn't know I was a retired bodyguard who spent 26 years learning exactly how to protect the people I love without losing myself doing it. I'm not going to hurt you tonight, but I am going to make sure this is the last time you ever think you can put your hands on someone smaller than you and walk away clean." He drove off, and I stood in my driveway for a long moment, feeling the adrenaline finally start to drain, feeling my hands begin to shake now that the danger had passed, the way they always used to after a real threat had cleared. When I went back inside, Emily was crying in Denise's arms, but they were different tears than the ones I'd seen the night she called me. Not tears of fear, but the exhausted, relieved tears of someone who has. We called the police that night and filed a report. The following week, with Frank's help, Emily filed for a formal protective order using the documentation we'd assembled over the previous weeks. The withdrawn restraining order from his past, the messages, the incident at my house witnessed by 4 adults. It was granted within days. The legal consequences moved slower than the emotional ones, the way they usually do. Trevor was charged with trespassing and a misdemeanor count related to the confrontation at my house, given the witnesses and Denise's video, which she'd started recording the moment she dialed 911. A habit from a self-defense class. Years earlier, she told me later, never imagining she'd need it at her brother-in-law's dinner table. He pleaded down to a lesser charge, community service, and a formal no-contact order, which is often how these things resolve, less satisfying than people expect from the outside. But enough, combined with the protective order, to give Emily the legal wall she needed. His employer, when word of the incident and the earlier employment history Ray had uncovered, eventually reached them through channels I won't detail, quietly let him go. I felt no particular satisfaction in that, though I won't pretend I felt sorrow either. Consequences are not the same thing as revenge, and I want to be clear about that distinction because it's the one that mattered most to me through all of this. I never once, in 11 months, raised a hand to that young man. I never threatened him with anything beyond the plain, honest truth of what I was capable of and what I would do if he crossed a line again. The consequences he faced were the ordinary, earned consequences of his own choices, delivered through the systems built for exactly that purpose. The law, his employer, the community around him finally seeing him clearly. Emily's reaction, in the days that followed, moved through stages I recognized from my training in a different context. The way people process surviving a genuine threat. First, a kind of brittle competence, handling the paperwork and the police report with a steadiness that worried me more than tears would have, because I recognized it as shock wearing the mask of strength. Then, about a week later, it broke. A full night of crying that she let herself have finally, curled on my couch under an old blanket, asking questions that had no good answers. How did I not see it sooner? Why did I keep making excuses for him? What does it say about me that I let it get this far? I didn't try to answer those questions with easy reassurance. I told her the truth instead. The truth I'd learned watching dangerous men for 26 years. The people who are good at this, good at control, good at making cruelty look like love, are good at it precisely because it doesn't look like anything at first. You didn't miss something obvious, I told her. You missed something that was built on purpose to be missed. That's not a flaw in you. That's a skill in him. An ugly one. Denise and her husband checked in constantly those first weeks, and Priya moved back into something closer to her old rhythm with Emily. Long phone calls, weekend visits, the slow rebuilding of a friendship that had been quietly starved for months. Emily's co-workers at the dental office, once she felt safe enough to tell a few of them the full story, turned out to be a source of unexpected strength. Her office manager, the very promotion Trevor had talked her out of taking back in April, was still open. And in November, 5 weeks after that Sunday night in my driveway, Emily took it. I noticed my own aftermath too, if I'm honest. The old instincts that had gone quiet in retirement came roaring back to life that autumn, checking Emily's location on the family tracking app more than either of us probably found healthy. driving past her townhouse on my evening walks more often than coincidence would explain. Waking at odd hours, convinced I'd heard something. Denise gently was the one who pointed out that I was doing to myself what I'd trained other people to avoid doing to their principals. Staying in a permanent state of high alert long after the actual threat had passed. "You did your job, Marcus," she told me one evening over coffee on my porch. "You protected her. Now you have to let yourself stand." A month after the incident, Emily and I fell into a new rhythm. Not the same as before Trevor, but something steadier, built with more honesty than we'd had in years. She started coming to Sunday dinner again. Different now. She talked more, asked more questions, let herself be more fully seen. One evening, over dishes, she asked me to tell her what my old job had really involved. I told her stories I'd never shared before. Not the dramatic ones, but the quiet ones. The years of watching and waiting. The discipline of restraint. She listened the way you listen when you're trying to understand the shape of the person telling it. "I always thought you were just being overprotective," she said quietly. "I didn't understand it was, I don't know, a whole language you speak, reading rooms like that. I wish I'd trusted it sooner," I told her. "About Trevor? I saw the flags in April. I didn't act until October. You didn't ignore them, Dad. You gave me room to see it myself. If you'd come in swinging in April, I would have defended him. I needed to get there on my own mostly. You just made sure I had somewhere safe to land when I did." I've thought about that conversation many times since. I'm not certain she's entirely right. There are nights I still wonder if 6 months of watching cost us something we can't get back. But I've come to believe there's wisdom in what she said. Wisdom I recognize from my old work. You cannot force a principal to see a threat before they're ready to see it. All you can do is stay close, stay steady, and be ready the moment they are. 6 weeks after the confrontation, Emily started therapy, her own choice. Her therapist, she told me, used the phrase coercive control to describe the pattern Trevor had built around her, a clinical name for the thing I'd been tracking in my legal pad since October without quite having the vocabulary for it. Hearing the professional term seemed to help her the way my old training language had helped me, turning a confusing tangle of feelings into something with edges, something you could name, and therefore begin to dismantle. By December, 3 months out, I noticed the smaller signs of her coming back to herself. She rejoined the Thursday pottery class she'd quietly given up in the spring and brought home a lopsided ceramic mug she was disproportionately proud of, which now sits on my kitchen shelf and always will. She and Priya took a weekend trip to the coast, a kind of spontaneous freedom that would have been unthinkable for her a year earlier. She started dating again, cautiously, and the first time she brought someone new to Sunday dinner, I watched her watch him, noticing small things, asking herself questions she'd never thought to ask about Trevor. She'd learned to read rooms too, in her own way. Not my training, her own hard-won. By the following spring, a full season after that night in my driveway, Emily and I had built something between us that felt, in its own way, stronger than what we'd had before any of it happened. Not because the trauma was worth it, I'll never believe that, and I won't pretend to for the sake of a tidy ending, but because we'd been tested, together, and found something solid underneath the test. She trusted her own instincts more. I trusted myself to know when to step back and when to step forward. We had, without ever saying it out loud in those terms, built a new kind of family protocol, one built on honesty instead of avoidance, on speaking up instead of managing the peace. One evening in April, almost exactly a year after Trevor Ashford first showed up at that birthday party, Emily and I sat on my porch the way Carol and I used to, watching the light go gold over the street. I used to think being protected meant someone else handling everything for you, she said. Now I think it means someone standing close enough that you're not alone while you handle it yourself. People sometimes ask whether I regret waiting as long as I did. 6 months of flags, I noted, and set aside, because I was afraid of being the father who ruins his daughter's relationship out of paranoia. I've turned that question over more times than I can count. I don't regret giving Emily room to find her own clarity. I do regret how much that room cost her. I don't think there's a perfect formula for that balance between respecting someone's autonomy and protecting them from a danger they can't yet see. I think you do the best you can. You pay attention even when it's uncomfortable, and you make sure the person you love always knows there is a door open to you the moment they're ready to walk through it. 26 years of protecting other people's families taught me how to read danger in a room. It took my own daughter and the hardest year of my life since losing my wife to teach me that the real skill was never the strength to stop a threat. It was the discipline to wait, to watch, to gather what was true instead of what was convenient, and to act with control instead of rage when the moment finally came. Anyone can throw a punch out of anger. It takes something harder to stand calm in your own doorway and simply refuse to let harm pass through it. If there's someone in your life right now who reminds you of Emily in this story, someone slowly disappearing into smaller and smaller versions of themselves under the weight of someone else's control, I'd ask you to do what I wish I'd done a little sooner. Pay attention. Write it down if you have to. And when the moment comes that you're needed, be ready to stand there, calm, steady, and absolutely certain of your own ground. If this story meant something to you, I'd ask you to share it with someone who might need to hear it today. You never